We have quite a few people on the line so far, so we'll go ahead and get started. If anyone cares to turn their camera on, at least for introductions, please feel free to do so. But we'll go ahead and just start with introductions today. I'm Jamie Line with WSP. I'd like to welcome all of you to our 5th webinar on exploring bridge bundling in Illinois. I'll hand it over to anyone else who wants to jump in for introductions.
This is Kate Goshaw with WSP. Hi, everybody.
Good afternoon. This is Deborah Brown with WSP.
Good afternoon, Mark Polston, also with WSP.
Good afternoon. This is Jamali Gurinawi with WSP.
This is Scott Sigmund with the Illinois Soybean Association.
I'm Blake Carricker with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, I think we had two at one there. I heard Clark Carricker.
Blake Roderick with the Pike Scott Farm Bureau.
Hi, Blake. Thanks.
Blake, I love where you are.
Yes, it's my ranch in Texas.
Wonderful.
Mark Paulus, Operators Local 150.
This is Dwayne Radaman, Illinois Association of County Engineers and Knox County Engineer.
Todd Main with Illinois Soy.
Hi, this is Holly Beeman with IDOT.
This is Carl Pusey with IDOT.
This is Tim Armbrecht with IDOT.
Anyone else on the line care to introduce themselves?
This is Bob Perkins with IDOT Bridge Office.
All right.
I don't know if I came through earlier. This is Craig Fink, Tazewell County, Illinois.
Oh, thanks, Craig. Yeah, I don't think we heard you before. All right, sounds good. Well, let's get rolling here. We can move into the agenda slide. So again, I'm Jamie Line with WSP. I'm gonna kind of toggle back and forth between me and a few other people during this presentation today, just to mix it up a little bit. I'm gonna give a quick recap of some of the prior webinars that we've held, and then we're gonna move into the preliminary survey results from the MetroQuest survey that was sent out I think the first time a few weeks ago, and then there's been one reminder since. We're going to walk through those results with you today. And as we do that, we're going to follow a format that kind of states the question and then shows the responses as they came in, and then we'll give you our interpretation of what we think that response means. And it's going to fall into kind of 4 different categories, which is a participant overview, priorities and questions, priority questions, strategy questions, and then some other general survey questions. But we'll go ahead and start with a recap of some of the previous webinars, just to kind of bring people who might be new to the call up to speed on some of the types of things we've talked about so far before we get into the survey results, because the purpose of the survey was really to start gauging what else do folks want to learn about for the remainder of this educational and socialization process. So the first webinar that we held was back in February, and it was really an overview of what is bridge bundling, where is it happening in other places across the country, the fact that it does use alternative funding and financing. It can oftentimes result in a lot of economies and efficiencies and cost savings. And then we talked about some of the other 5 states that have been doing bridge bundling programs. Our second webinar in April, we had a guest speaker from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, which many of you probably know is basically the Kentucky Department of Transportation. They just go by the term cabinet, so it's Kentucky DOT. And what we talked about there was options for structure types, and how their program really focused on bridges that were of similar complexity, similar size, and things like that, so that they could come at it from more of a standardized approach, and that the program should be limited to structures and immediate approaches that exclude more significant asset improvements. And also bridges should be bundled to create efficiencies rather than for political or other considerations. So again, these are just some of the highlights from those other conversations that occurred. And there are notes available for all of these meetings, as well as recordings if anyone is new to this call and would like to hear a little bit more in depth about those things. And then the final two, the program that we covered in May was with USDOT and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and what their federal funding programs offer. Some of the highlights there were federal credit programs offer tools focused on infrastructure delivery in rural areas. Programs provide loans direct to local governments to fit limited cash flow schedules, and then flexible payment terms and low interest rates. And then in June, we had a great conversation with the Ohio DOT and the Ohio County Engineers Association, and what their experience has been like working together on a bundling program. And a few of the highlights from that are that ODOT and the County Engineers Association, their objective criteria used to prioritize and select bridge projects included 200 of an initial pool of 900 candidate bridges. So they had a methodology they used to kind of whittle down the top 200 they felt would fit the program best. The bundle packages were manageable in size, ranging from 1 to 6 bridges in each of those bundles, that generated significant competition and opportunities for small contracting firms as part of their program. And that the program was run in collaboration, or is currently run in collaboration, between ODOT, the County Engineers Association, and some of the local governments as well. And that it now funds approximately $5 million in bridge rehab each year. And then you can see some of the statistics there off to the side. The program was announced in 2013. It was a 3-year program, invested $120 million, and has repaired or is in the process of replacing more than 200 bridges. So again, just a little recap of some of the things we've discussed previously in these webinars. More details are available in the notes and the recordings, and of course, in conversation with us. So please feel free to reach out at any point in time. So kind of, recapping what we've covered up to this point, we want to spend the remainder of this meeting getting into the preliminary survey results, where we were asking you all and a number of other stakeholders that the survey went out to kind of tell us what your thoughts and priorities are related to a potential bundling program, and what we could focus on next in terms of keeping this conversation going. So Adam, if you want to go to the next slide. This is the survey welcome screen that those of you who took the survey saw. And it had 4 or 5 different tabs. One just kind of explaining what we're trying to do with the survey. The second called priority ranking, strategy, rating, standard survey, and then a wrap up. So we're going to walk through each of those areas today. Next slide. Thanks. So as of about 6 days ago, we had 103 surveys completed. Since then, there have been about 6 more surveys that have been completed. So this is a snapshot we're giving you today. We are going to keep the survey open and for at least another month, potentially longer. We're going to just kind of play that by ear. But we want to be giving you updates in terms of how things are, the results are starting to look from these surveys, and then we'll give you an update at each of the subsequent meetings that we have for as far out as we continue to keep the survey open. So 103 surveys as of last week. So this is the folks how they've sort of described themselves in terms of who has taken the survey so far. You can see the large majority at 44% are referring to themselves as a business person. 26% are referring to themselves as a farmer or part of the agriculture industry. 16% are local officials, 12% are members of the public, and 2% are state officials. And I'm going to hand it over to Kate now just to mix it up a little bit, and she's going to walk through some of the findings from the survey priorities questions.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So to start, this was the very first, or one of the very first questions in the heart of the survey here. And we wanted to know what matters most. So when someone opened up the screen, these factors here on the left were organized somewhat randomly, and then you had to drag and drop them into priority. So you had to drag them above that line in order to rank them, which I thought was a very cool survey feature. And the question was, what are your top 5 priorities in order when it comes to a bridge bundling program? And if we go to the next slide, these were the priorities as they were defined. So there was the cost. So the cost should be minimized through efficiencies and other measures, project delivery, which referred to innovative ways to design and build bridges. Worst first referred to bridges that were in the worst condition should get fixed first. Speed, bridge construction should be accelerated. The number of bridges, so that repairing the number of bridges as many as possible is a top priority. Accountability, so that referred to if the public was able to easily identify which bridges were part of the program. Cooperation, so this term or priority referred to cooperation between government and private entities at all levels. And then finally, alternative financing, so finding new ways to pay for the program beyond traditional funding mechanisms. So if we go to the next page, we'll see how they rank. So to explain this graphic, you need to know that the ones that are lowest rated are the ones that were top priorities. So remember, you're ranking them 1 to 5. So if cost was number 1 on your list, they would have the lower number. So you'll see here actually that cost was one of those that had the highest rank in that top 5 list, and that cooperation on the other end of the spectrum had the lowest rank on that spectrum. Now my interpretation of this, it told me 2 things. One is that I feel like our group and those that were surveyed have come to a consensus on the scale of the problem in Illinois. So there's not many people who are debating whether or not there's a problem with bridges in Illinois. The other interesting thing that I thought, just based on the other webinars that we've participated in, is that other successful bridge bundling programs had that type of consensus, and then they also built programs around these 3 criteria. Cost, so trying to find a way to deliver the most bridges for the best price, and then also to avoiding the politics of prioritization and really addressing infrastructure need at its core. So those are kind of the 2 big takeaways that I took away from how the priorities were ranked and what the survey results told us. So now if you just move to the next slide. I'm curious about what you guys thought about my take. Was my interpretation of the results accurate? Any thoughts or disagreement is welcome.
And if you'd like us to go back to the slide, we're happy to. Just let us know.
Yeah.
And we are going to do some polling as well. Sorry, Kate.
Oh, I was saying, sorry, Jamie. I was going to say, I wish there was a feature to throw a tomato. You can just throw a tomato at me on here. You're like, no, that's not how I interpret this. But I think they just have these happy reactions down here.
Like your thumbs up.
My thumbs up, yeah.
Love it. We are going to do some polling today just to get a little more insight, hopefully, into some of the responses that we got. But that's going to come in a little bit later.
Could you go back to the slide with the graph? Thank you. This is Scott, and it's somewhat notable that there is pretty significant differentiation between the cost and the accountability and cooperation that is important as ensuring that the job gets done. There's oftentimes questions about trust in government, but that in terms of getting bridges fixed at an operational level, probably some level of confidence from the survey respondents that the county engineers and IDOT are getting the job done once the projects start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also thought it was interesting that speed was lower ranked as well.
Yeah, I don't know if that's potentially speculation from people or just a feeling that, you know, even though, you know, cost is obviously the most important factor and getting the worst first done is right up there with cost, that, you know, speed is just not quite up there with those other things.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody in the group feel like any priorities were missing? All right.
Okay, well, we can move on to the next section.
Sounds great.
Which Mark is going to dive into the questions and responses from the funding strategies.
Okay, good afternoon again. So there were three set of strategy-related questions for funding strategies, which is the slide that you see in front of you right now that has a screenshot of those questions. And then there were project delivery strategies and innovation strategies. So first, just talking about the funding strategies. So alternative finance is, well, and let me say, these were 1 to 5 stars. And so 5 was the most important and 1 being least important. So the first one in this group was alternative finance. And if you want to go to the next slide, I can talk about the subjects while you can see the results. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. So alternative finance was described as, these are approaches that use private sector financing for bridge repairs and replacements. So if you, you know, this one among really all of these sets of strategy questions, this one had the most kind of disparity on the end. So you had a lot of 1s and you had a relatively high number of 5s compared to the other questions. So there's really doesn't seem to be a real consensus here, but it does, if you look at it and look at the numbers, the favorability leans a little higher toward the high end. And then Garvey bonds are using, these are bonds that depend on federal funding. So you can go ahead and issue the bonds and then in anticipation of future federal funding to repay those bonds. This one was more evenly split. So then the alternative finance, if you look at those, there was a lot of, you know, kind of even from 1 to 4 anyway. It was fairly even with a few 5s. So not a strong consensus, and looking at the numbers, it skewed toward the low end. So not as favorable as alternative finance. Looking at local government, there was, this is leveraging revenues from local funds, local levies, whether new or existing ones, to pay for state bridge projects. And that's often done like within a specific geographic area where those revenues are released. And looking at the responses, those skew toward the higher end, so the higher number of points. And then finally, private activity bonds. These are bonds that are issued to, for project costs, but they're done by a private company or a private developer. So it's private money, but those private investors are able to have income from those bonds on a tax-free basis. So it's kind of like making private bonds more like municipal bonds, so they get the tax advantage. And this was 3 was the most common response here, so kind of more middle of the road, but the responses overall you can see skew toward the lower end. Now looking at the
Sorry, Mark, I was just going to say, contrary to one of the slides that Kate was presenting just a minute ago, where 1 was the highest priority and 5 was the lowest, this is the opposite. 5 is highest priority in this one, and 1 is lowest.
Right,
priority.
That's right, yeah. That's a good point. So looking at the next, so anyway, just, you see alternative finance, even though it got a lot of ones, it's still, if you look at all the numbers, it's skewed toward the higher end. Looking at local government, that seemed to be viewed pretty favorably, more than the others. So that's what some of the takeaways there. If you want to move to the next group, which are the project delivery strategies. So this is design build, practical design, prefabricated bridges, life cycle cost analysis. And looking at what those are and looking at their responses, if you want to move to the next slide, thank you. So life cycle cost analysis, this was viewed very favorably. If you see the responses skewed very heavily toward the high end with 30 number 4s and 36 number 5s. So it very much has strong support. And this would be looking and applying benefit cost ratios to projects, including maintenance and capital expenses. So moving to I want to keep moving along here, moving to design build. This was probably the most evenly dispersed of all responses in the strategy sections. It definitely was in the project delivery section. As you can see, the others all kind of skewed favorably, but this one not so much. It actually is slightly on the lower end, a little bit more on the 1 and 2 than 4 and the 5, with a bigger group in the middle. And we found that interesting in light of the fact that Illinois is one of the only states that doesn't really allow design build as a procurement method in its highway and roadway procurements. So that's there's a lot to think about there, because as you know, we talked about it, especially in Kentucky, design build was the way that they were able to scale up their bridges and their program. So need to think a little bit more about that, and I think have some good discussion on that, and in a few moments would welcome your feedback on that. So also just related to design, the next one, practical design. This was designing bridges to meet the need without a bunch of extras, without having new roadways, approach roadways, no beautification, no other kind of upgrades. And that was, keeping it practical was viewed favorably, as was the next one, not quite as to the greatest extent, prefabricated bridges. That's allowing for the use of prefabricated bridges that can be easily assembled or set in place. So basically build it and just drop it in. So the final area of strategy was innovation, and that was looking at standardization, reduced bureaucracy, and reducing red tape. So the next slide shows those results, and I'll explain what those exactly meant. Standardization. Yeah, standardization is actually on the far right, and standardization is, just have designs and design details across multiple bridges that are, very uniform or, very limited types of, not much variation. And this was, even though it got fewer 5s than the other two, if you look how many 4s it got, it was definitely viewed the most favorably among 3 innovation strategies. And, a point was made that, at one point, Illinois did have a set of standardization criteria, and, it would be worth talking about as to whether that would be beneficial again, and, just setting certain parameters for project delivery. So, again, during the a brief moment for questions after this slide, if anyone has any feedback or questions on that concept, standardization. So looking to the left of that, there's red tape to the far left. That's expediting permitting and environmental clearances. That was viewed very favorably. It's got very strong support. And reduced bureaucracy, reducing management oversight by having one contract. And that also was viewed very favorably, not quite as high as the others, but still very favorable. So we have a few moments now to kind of think back about these strategies, funding strategies, funding/financing, project delivery, innovation. Any questions or any comments on this section?
Let's go back maybe to the first slide. Sorry, the first results slide.
Slide 13.
Yeah, that's perfect right there. If anyone's willing to give an opinion, it'd be interesting to know, any, thoughts on maybe why everything except the Garvey bonds is kind of all over the place, up and down, in terms of whether people viewed it as, something really important or something not important at all. There's some pretty big disparities between, importance and non-importance in the orange and the white.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the differences of opinion. There's a lot more up and down on this side.
Jamie, this is Todd. One thing that I noticed and just kind of did a quick analysis of this is that if you look at this in just a pretty simple, take the first 2 lines and put them as a negative category, the blue line as a neutral, and the top 2 categories as positive, and so you just did a positive negative analysis. I was surprised that alternative finance and local government were equal in terms of their intensity. And what that said to me was that we have a recognition among the respondents that there is a role for local government, and they've got to step up and play a role moving forward, which is, I think, counterintuitive. We all know how strapped local government is for funding, but it seems like everybody feels pretty strongly that they have to have some skin in the game, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great point, Todd. And I feel like we see that in some of the other responses we're going to look at here shortly from the other sections of the survey. And I'm wondering if it's not continued lack of familiarity or lack of comfort with alternative funding and financing, and the potential for local governments to really try to take on a program themselves without, higher level government involvement.
The other thing I thought was interesting is that private activity bonds are not viewed very, very favorably. That was surprising to me. People don't have confidence that that's a good way to go. So that speaks to if there's a interest in private activity using private activity bonds, there's going to have to be, some more education and engagement with opinion leaders and stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments from the group?
Yes, this is Craig Fink on the survey portion on the local governments stepping up and funding more. I think what you'll find in Illinois is it's 100% depending on your geographic area. If you're in a highly urban area, you may have some flexibility to move funding around and do something to fund a project or two or many. But for about 90% of the state that's highly rural, you're having trouble coming up after saving for 5 or 6 years, coming up with 10% of the cost of one project to match existing state or federal money. So, that just want to make sure the group's aware of that it's going to be very highly specific as to what local government you're talking about. If it's township in a rural area, which again is about 90% of the state, forget it. It's a great sentiment, but it's blood from a turnip.
Who's they?
They didn't give us that penny.
Oh, what'd they give us?
They'll
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think, I think that the origin of the respondent certainly would come into play there, and just in terms of the optionality, that's a really good point.
Well, and going off that optionality, and this is Ben Brockman here joining late, when you're talking about alternative finance, that's a very broad category, and the answer that always goes back to is going to be generally some type of tolling. That's not the only option, and that's one to recognize that there could be other solutions there, but the high-profile projects that tend to have that are ones where there's that type of revenue stream or whatever you want to call it clearly identified, and that doesn't seem to that the view is likely it doesn't apply to a lot of options. And building off what Craig said, you look at local government, well, which local government and how much do they have to do? If they have a lot to do, if it's not just local infrastructure project, if there's schools or libraries or other things like that, how does that start to add into it? Because your local government is going to have a whole lot of different areas, but it's also a very familiar way to go with known pitfalls, known areas, and realistically, a lot of us who work with local governments, we've had those relationships either through ourselves or someone in our organization for a very, very long time. I don't know that you have those same types of relationships in the alternative finance realm, particularly given the more global nature and structure of the organizations that tend to focus on that.
Yep, those are all valid points. Okay, any other questions or comments on this slide before we go to the next one for a little more discussion? Okay, let's go. Okay, I thought this one was really interesting in terms of just seeing how important, like life cycle cost analysis is when looking at a program like this, and longevity of the infrastructure itself. And then also, again, on the practical design side, folks are really fine with that. It sounds like they just want to get some bridges done, and they don't need all the bells and whistles. They just looking to improve, basic, safety and, functionality of the structure. And then there's also a good amount who were okay with the prefab bridges. So those three categories were pretty different than the design build, as Mark pointed out, in terms of the responses really being pretty close to even. in terms of the level of importance there to people. Any other takeaways or perspectives from folks? Yep, those seem pretty cut and dry in terms of how the responses read.
I would, Jamie, this is Scott. I would just add, going back to that slide, that recalling the balance of respondents, a lot of business people, a lot of farmers, some officials. The audience or the respondents may not fully understand design build. And while the one sentence provided some outline on that and practical design, Illinois is one of 3 states that doesn't have a design build authorization right off the bat. It really requires some extra hoops to jump through, and for the state to get involved in that kind of an initiative may be more possible at local levels, but still not necessarily all respondents would know some of that wonkiness. And so that just may impact some of the responses that are characterized here.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, I think that ultimately creates an additional opportunity for education.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think we all understand that there is, you know, even though we are 5 webinars in, there's still a lot of education and socialization to do in terms of explaining alternative delivery to folks. Any other reactions to this slide? It's pretty cut and dry as well in terms of what, you know, folks identified the priorities being for innovation.
I would add that on the standardization, when you really look at 4 and 5 together, that it's easy to just look at 5, but 4 and 5 together, standardization really jumps to the top. And Craig has told me stories in the past about standardization that really helped with efficiency of project delivery. Craig, I don't know if you want to give a thumbnail sketch, but Mark, with his overview, provided kind of that perspective that that's what the marketplace, that's what the respondents to the survey are telling us.
Okay, well, it looks pretty clear. All right, let's go ahead and move into the next section of the survey. Deborah's going to jump in here again, just to mix it up a little bit and run through some of the what we were referring to in the survey anyway as some of the more standard questions.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as we move into these next few questions, these are geared towards soliciting input to help us shape the work group strategies and activities in a couple key areas as we continue to advance our efforts to socialize the bridge bundling concept. The 2 key areas that we're going to cover in these next few slides are building support and overcoming obstacles. And the questions in these areas are broken into 2 parts. So starting with building support, the 2 questions that were asked are, number 1, what is the most effective way to build support for bridge bundling? And respondents were asked to choose among 5 options. And then the second question we asked there was, what group needs most to understand the features and benefits in order to serve as lead support for bridge bundling among the other groups? So let's move to the next screen and examine the responses to the first question. So again, starting with helping us to understand what you think is the most effective way to build support for bridge bundling. So the respondents were asked to choose from among contacting elected officials, news media outreach, paid advertisements, public meetings and webinars, or social media and websites. And so as you can see here, contacting elected officials was the overwhelming choice for 55% of the responses that we've tallied so far. But also there's a fairly sizable response here in favor of building support through public meetings and webinars. You know, if you lump these two together, that's 81% of total responses in favor of contacting elected officials and presumably disseminating more information through public meetings and webinars. When we get to the discussion part, though, I'd really like to understand from you all what your thoughts are with respect to what group of elected officials we should be reaching out to, primarily local elected officials or state level elected officials or all of the above. I'd be very interested in getting a little bit more of a drill down on that. And then two, you know, whether or not, you know, because of the pretty sizable response in favor of contacting elected officials, whether that should be the primary focus, or because we've got more than 25% who have suggested that we focus on building support through public meetings and webinars, that be a combined focus for helping to build support. So I'm going to go ahead to the next part of building support. But please keep those questions in mind and, you know, start to enter your responses into the chat or jump in when we get to the discussion slide. So our other question on building support is, what group needs most to understand the features and benefits in order to serve as lead support for bridge bundling among the other groups? And again, large number of respondents tallied to date indicated state officials. The other options were federal officials, the private sector, the public, township, city, and county officials. There wasn't anything else that was really close in terms of a second choice. However, if you look at the public and township, city, and county officials, those two combined totaled about 34%. And if you relate this back to the prior slide, those are folks that you might be very likely to reach through the public meetings and webinars options that were suggested in the last slide for ways of, you know, building support. But with respect to the primary group here that was voted on, state officials, I'd be very interested in understanding what type of state officials folks had in mind. Are these appointed state officials? Are we thinking more along the lines of maybe IDOT as the state officials? It would be very, very helpful to understand what state officials are thought of as those who, you know, should best understand the features and benefits of bridge bundling and serve in a lead role in building support.
We actually have set up an opportunity here to do like a two-part polling question. And it's anonymous. So for everyone who's logged in, we can put these questions up on the screen for you. And you can anonymously respond and just give us a little additional guidance in terms of what you think contacting elected officials means on this particular screen, and then what state officials are on the next screen. If folks don't mind just kind of filling that out and submitting, we can kind of see. And we also understand that, you know, the folks on the line today, you all are, you know, not all of the folks who have taken the survey so far, but so we'll certainly be monitoring the rest of the survey results over the course of the next month, and then really, you know, kind of focusing in on things after we have a more robust response. But any additional guidance folks would like to provide today in terms of how their interpretation of or thoughts were about elected officials would be very helpful. All right, and so there are the responses. Seems like it's a combination of state and local, at least according to those of us on the line today. So that's good feedback. Thank you very much for that. Pretty close in terms of 69 and 46. So more involvement on both the state and local side. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next poll question, which is just again going back to, you know, what state officials are we specifically talking about here? Governor's office, legislators, IDOT or the tollway, or other?
I haven't seen the Zoom poll option, by the way, Jamie. It's pretty cool.
Yes, we're happy we found it.
Yeah. I've seen them in like GoToMeeting and the Adobe Connect, and they're a lot clunkier. Nice.
Okay.
Okay,
Legislators.
so that's fairly consistent across both questions.
Yeah.
Pretty closely followed by IDOT, the tollway, and the governor's office too.
All right, thank you.
That's very helpful.
All right, next slide.
Okay, so our next focused area is looking for your input on how best to overcome obstacles to bridge bundling. So in this section, we ask 2 survey questions. The first asks respondents to indicate what they believe to be the one biggest obstacle to bridge bundling in Illinois. And the second question asks what is the most compelling argument for bridge bundling. So let's look at the results in response to the first question. Respondents indicated their choice of obstacles as the biggest obstacle across bureaucracy, existing laws, funding, the fact that it's never been done before, or politics. And 38% of the respondents selected bureaucracy as the biggest obstacle. A lot of votes came in favor of funding as well as a fairly sizable obstacle here. And I'm assuming similar to what was shared earlier, this relates to funding constraints as an obstacle. And this, as well as I think the findings in the other question, at least as far as funding is concerned, definitely supports the need for us to do a little bit more in terms of helping folks to understand some of the low-cost alternative finance options that are available to help to smooth out some of the funding challenges. Certainly, we would not suggest that folks undertake a lot of debt or high cost financing, but we did present in the past some options that are relatively low cost opportunities to stretch out limited available dollars today for, interest rates at like in the 1 or 2% range. So we probably could stand to do a little bit more in terms of education there. But bureaucracy is another common theme that is showing up here as an obstacle. And I'd like to understand some of the examples of the bureaucratic challenges that folks see. It's also interesting to me that existing laws did not, there were not very many people who selected existing laws as a challenge. And I wonder if somehow in the bureaucracy tally, there's some aspect of existing laws that's factored in there, or is it process-based in terms of the required levels of approvals that one has to go through given the current existing statutory frameworks? Or is there some element of this bureaucracy obstacle that has to do with challenges to ensuring that there is the right level of statutory authority? Did we have a polling question there?
From the Illinois Chamber, and I'll weigh in a little bit here because I think these two questions tie in together. And so before I was at the Chamber, I did 2 years at IDOT and then 2 years at DeWitt. And during my time at IDOT, I found it was like a big stone rolling down the hill in terms of its bureaucracy. And then IDOT does what it does fairly well, but they do a pretty terrible job of changing directions. And if there is going to be a change in directions, it's pretty much foisted upon the agency from outside forces, either bottom down, which is why I think people answered that it's important to lobby the locals, or top down from state officials, particularly transportation committee members in the General Assembly. There's really innovation from within, and I think that's where that comes from. And when I moved over to DeWitt, I felt like I went to work for a little tech startup in terms of it just being more nimble. And I think it's a real weakness of IDOT, and I think that's where you're seeing these poll results come in. I just think there's a fear of standing out and making a change unless it comes from the top or from a groundswell at the bottom.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in here? Okay. All right. So the ability to I guess, initiate change within the IDOT construct and where the, I guess, the source of the impetus for that change comes from is a huge obstacle here. Okay. Jamie, is there a polling question at this point?
No, our next one is between slide 30 and 31.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next aspect of overcoming obstacles. The second question here is of a more positive note. And so we're asking, what is the one most compelling argument for bridge bundling? And the choices given were administrative efficiency, cost savings, done quicker, improved safety, and job creation. And in another landslide, we have cost savings selected by 56% of those that have been surveyed thus far. Perhaps this indicates that among the key elements of the information disseminated through contacting elected officials and at public meetings and webinars, it might be important to demonstrate cost savings that have been achieved by states that have utilized bridge bundling, and perhaps providing some realistic projected savings that might be achieved using a similar approach in Illinois. Let's move over. Well, no, let's just stay here and just start the discussion though. I'd also be curious to know though, whether or not in general, this group is actually bought into the notion that bridge bundling can bring about cost savings. Or is it that the suggestion here or the takeaway should be that we need to deliver more information about the potential for cost savings? Any thoughts on that?
This is Ben Brockman, and I wouldn't dismiss the administrative efficiency side of that. I think the cost savings is a result of that, but I think going off some of the things Clark said a couple slides ago, you know, the administrative efficiency for these types of things could potentially go beyond specific programs and be a broader best practice, provided, you know, there's a lot of asterisks there, but I wouldn't, you know, necessarily discount that side as well. I think the cost savings are the more obvious one. You know, anytime you're looking at something, you're going to look at the cost. That's just the reality of it. But that is, you know, the cost savings is a potential, you know, result and argument as a result of the other things, although, again, you know, other projects in other parts of the country might not always provide that best that best example.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that sort of harkens back to some of the lessons learned that we heard from at least one of our presenters that we had earlier on, where they certainly suggested that as a best practice going forward, if they had it to do all over again, they would be more, I guess, deliberate about bundling bridge projects that were of like size and characteristic, rather than based on political preferences. Because that may have cost them some things in terms of opportunities lost in cost savings. So your point is definitely well taken. Yes, cost savings do also emanate from some of these other elements or these other options that were here. Certainly, if you're more efficient, you're likely to save. If you get projects done quicker, you sort of shield yourselves from the impacts of inflation. Any other thoughts on this screen, on this slide? Okay, let's go back to the preceding slide. We heard some good input on the bureaucracy. Do you feel like we've pretty much covered the issue with respect to the funding? It's the challenges and the constraints for the local governments, as well as I presume for IDOT too.
Well, this is Dwayne Ratterman from Knox County. I've been at the Highway Department for over 30 years, and in that time, the cost of a small structure on a township road has quadrupled, while the funding has stayed relatively the same for that type of structure. So the cost is everything. You know, if I can deliver if I can build 1.5 bridges by doing it in a bundle, compared to one bridge with existing conditions the way they are, you know, that would be a win for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the opportunity to get more projects moved out of your pipeline quicker. Anyone else offer anything up? Okay. We talked about the officials. So I think we've pretty much covered the, I guess, the results from this section. Jamie, I think we're ready to move on.
Sounds good. All right, I think this is back to me, right? So a few more questions that we're going to walk through, kind of in the wrap-up section here. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Adam. So is bridge bundling a viable option for fixing a large number of bridges in Illinois? I think we're probably not surprised to see that the overwhelming majority said yes, but there is the 34% that said we're not sure, and that not sure is probably linked to a lot of the types of things that we discussed today, regarding, you know, additional political leadership and cutting through some of the bureaucracy and the red tape, and then also continued education about, you know, exactly how do you get it done. The good news here is that of the 103 respondents as of last week, only 9% said no. Next slide, please. And then what's your level of support for pursuing bridge bundling in Illinois? Again, pretty overwhelming support at 40% strongly supporting, 6% 6% strongly opposed, 44% somewhat support, and then 10% somewhat opposed. So it's that 44 plus 40% that, you know, are really the folks who are interested in you know, supporting some type of movement on bridge bundling in Illinois. So 84% there. Is anyone surprised to see these responses? No? Okay. Good deal. And then, you know, the rest of the conversation here is really about, you know, what do we do next and how do we, you know, what is the best way to continue communicating here? You can go ahead to the next slide. So staying involved was one of the last questions in the survey, and 39% said receiving emails and other information. 19% said continue educational meetings and webinars. 12% said develop an action plan for bundling implementation. 11 join a steering committee. 10 advocating at the local and state levels, and 9 leading a bridge bundling effort. So fairly dispersed. I mean, we definitely have 39% as the majority with, you know, continuing to receive emails and other information, but that's not going to, you know, really get it done. So I think it's these other things that we're seeing here on the screen, a combination of them, is, you know, how we continue to try to move the needle here on education and socialization. One of the you know, best things that we could ask you all for here on the phone is to just continue to promote this educational effort that we're doing by forwarding, you know, the meeting PowerPoints and, you know, asking, you know, someone who may be interested in this process if they would like a copy of the recording, or putting them directly in touch with us, and we'd be happy to kind of bring them up to speed. So please do continue to pass on the information about the effort here, and because we'd like to start seeing more people on these webinars in the future.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, this is Mark Polis. So I've got a couple questions, and I'm not sure who's appropriate to direct this to. But you know, so one of the first questions I have is, you know, have folks seen where this is occurring? You know, the bridge bundling in other places in the country. I mean, have we seen where the local contractor base, you know, either isn't big enough or doesn't have the bonding capacity or those types of things to bid on a bundled package where you've then got more national firms or folks from out of state coming in and bidding on these particular projects?
So, hi, this is Deborah. I'll respond to that. One of the examples that we saw with the Ohio program is that one of the key areas of focus they had was, ensuring competition for all size firms, particularly the local in-state firms, and they kept their packages fairly small. So some of their packages ranged in size from even just a single bridge that was being accelerated to packages up to 6 bridges. And that made the size of the bundles attainable for the local contracting firms.
Okay. Yes, I would think that in Illinois, I would say that that's probably one of the major concerns when it comes to something like this bridge bundling. And then, the other part of it is, is there something that's been done in other places in the country? We face a big political backlash when it comes to the diversity of firms or the diversity of the workforce on these particular projects, especially when you get outside of the city of Chicago and or Cook County and the Callers. And that doesn't mean to say we don't have that problem there as well, because we do. But have you seen that that's also, are there also things that are built into this bundling that takes care of that problem?
Yeah, this
or
is
is it better, right? Because we're bundling now. We're not talking about having to meet a particular goal on a particular bridge, but now we're going to meet a goal on 6 different bridges of like nature. And is there something that's being done that addresses that concern?
Yeah, another good example to look at too is the Pennsylvania Rapid Bridge Replacement Project, which was featured in the Baddock Institute webinar on bridge bundling back in, it was like February. And now, of course, they're well underway with that program, so they could report out on how things were working. And one of the interesting things about that project, so that is your classic design, build, finance, operate, maintain mega project. It was huge, and there were national vertically integrated contractors that competed on the project and subsequently won. And the one way that the Pennsylvania DOT kind of mitigated that concern was by increasing their disadvantaged business enterprise goals. So there's been some, I know that Walsh was like on the circuit in particular, the conference circuit, talking about how they met those more aggressive disadvantaged business and also local contractor goals. So they had a DBE goal, and then they also had they have to hire local guys to do stuff. So, and I can see if I can find out a little bit more about how they actually devised that, how they came up with the calculation, but I know that that's one way that program mitigated that concern, was that they just increased the DBE and local participation goals for the national contractor.
Okay.
But that's just one example.
I mean, by and large, I mean, the bridge bundling and what I've been hearing, through these multiple webinars is it's great, right? I mean, if it all works, if you're going to save these administrative expenses and otherwise have it's like Knox County says, right? 1.5 bridges for the price of 1. I think everybody's in favor of that. I'm just trying to figure out the kind of sort of political hurdles that exist in a place like Illinois. Trying to think through those things right before you start rolling this out to some other folks. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really great point, and your comment certainly hasn't fallen on deaf ears. I mean, P3 or alternative contracting or alternative financing, all of it altogether, bridge bundling, can raise some alarms with elected officials or the public or practitioners. People, they're bespoke contracts, so you have to kind of wade into them pretty carefully. And hopefully, I mean, I think what we learned from the webinars is that, that other states have successfully been able to do that, but there certainly isn't like a one-size-fits-all. And along those lines, we have to think about what really works for Illinois. And if a labor or contracting concern is something that's going to be a huge driver, then that's certainly one that needs to be addressed in how the program's set up. So I hear you.
Excellent, thank you.
Great question and great responses. Thank you all. Any other questions before we might move into the final wrap up here? Again, for those of you on the call, please feel free to forward the meeting invitations and the survey that was in it was in a link in the current meeting invitation, you know, tweet it out from your organization or just forward it on to other organizations that you are still part of. And then we do have a final poll regarding engagement and assistance with sort of helping to promote further education and socialization here of the concept of bridge bundling. So we're going to go ahead and pull that poll up right now. I just want to ask you this question in terms of, at least for folks on the line today, if you are willing to help kind of spread the word here, it would be good to know. And if you're not, then it'd be good to know that too. And maybe we'll stop asking, but I can't promise that. Oh, it looks like we're getting an error on this next poll, so I'm not sure we're going to be pulling that up. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, and we can keep trying there while we talk through the key takeaways. So these are just a few thoughts that we had as kind of the key takeaways from at least the polling results as of the 16th of July, so last week. It seems that there's pretty strong agreement that bridges need attention. And so we're wondering if some pertinent next steps related to that is continuing education and coalition building to determine bundling opportunities in Illinois. And then also there seems to be pretty strong agreement so far that bundling is an attractive option. So potential next steps there are to continue education and exploring how bundling programs are structured and what the pros and cons are, and pushing information out about that. Looks like the poll just popped up, so if folks wouldn't mind just pausing real quick and taking it, that would be great. Would you be willing to help actively support and promote further exploration of bridge bundling in Illinois? Again, it's anonymous, so we're not going to be, you know, calling on you specifically, but just trying to gauge the group here today. All right, looks good. 90%, excellent. So yeah, just going back to those points of please feel free to forward these emails and pass along the names of any folks that you think would be interested in this conversation so we can add them to the contact list. Another key takeaway, just coming down to the third one now here on the screen, is that there did seem to be a disparity in responses regarding the role of innovative financing tools. That kind of tells us that a potential next step here is to do some additional education regarding the role of innovative financing tools in bundling programs. We're not going to be able to rely on, you know, governments to do everything, especially as we move into, you know, a new world over the next several decades. There's going to have to be some additional creativity and tools that we have in our back pocket that we can pull out when we need them. And then the last one here is that desire for greater elected official and state officials involvement. I think we got a little bit of clarification on that today in terms of, you know, which elected and state officials folks may have been talking about in the current polling results. But other than that, we will continue to, you know, monitor the results as they come in over the course of the next month or so, and then report out on them again later. Are there any other key takeaways that folks would like to see us kind of focus on in some immediate next steps?
This is Ben Brockman, and I think anything that focuses on the more local nature, building off of some of Mark's questions and others about what that looks like, I think that would be very helpful, because it's not just the sales pitch, but it's also the understanding, again, of what does that look like in terms of project movement, what does that look like in terms of how do you track it? How do you measure it? How do you, most importantly, from my perspective, is how do you get people involved or firms involved that might not have considered this as an option for them, particularly at varying sizes? And then, you know, what does that look like? So just, I know that's a lot, but just something in that sphere of, here's someone who's been with it, here's how they've taken it, and here's how they've worked with some of those areas.
Great idea, Ben. Yeah, we had approached Walsh before about participating in one of the webinars to talk about their experience, and they were willing to do that. They were just a little distracted at the time that we had put the request in, because it was really when we were first coming into COVID. But we can revisit that. But we can also look at not just the large ones like Walsh, but we can try to reach out to some more of the smaller contractors here in the state as well, and get them involved in the discussion.
Yeah, it might be, and to be clear, the focus with Walsh was to get them to talk about some of the smaller firms that they engaged in the PennDOT program. But we may be able to see if we can reach out to some of the actual small contracting firms that participated in the Ohio program. It would be great to hear firsthand from someone who actually, you know, got the work.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other key takeaways from today? All right. Last slide then, which is basically thank you all for your participation in this today. Thank you for listening through the current state of the survey results. Again, if you know anybody who would like to be involved in this conversation or who would benefit from it, please just forward their contact information to Adam, whose email is here on the screen. And then we are planning our next webinar on August 20th. So stay tuned for the calendar invite for that.